Preface by David Christopher Lane. Before the current pandemic altered our day-to-day lives, the MSAC Philosophy Group had been working on a book entitled Doubting Mind, Great Skeptical Thinkers, which contained separate essays on a number of notable researchers who champion critical thinking and skepticism when analyzing paranormal claims, such as UFOs, astrology, and various religious claims. The book has now been finished, though it took a bit longer than we anticipated. The word skeptical has too often been conflated with the word cynical. The former term comes from the Greek word skepsis, which properly defined means to look, view, observe, or, as Miguel de Unamuno explained in 1924 in his book Essays and Soliloquies, skeptic does not mean him who doubts, but him who investigates or researches as opposed to him who asserts and thinks that he has found. To be cynical, on the other hand, indicates that the person is predisposed to disbelieve or doubt the sincerity or value of social usages or personal character or motives and to express it by sarcasm and sneers, disparaging of the motives of others, captious, peevish. Therefore, it is important to understand that a skeptic is not one who ad hoc dismisses borderland ideas, but is one who is willing to go the extra mile to gather more, not less, information about any given phenomenon. As I have often remarked to the obvious consternation of certain cult followers, we, humans, are too gullible when we accept miraculous claims without further investigation. We are cheap sluts for the paranormal, believing too easily in conspiracy theories that defy the known laws of physics. There are many reasons why this is so, but I suspect that in a world where everything eventually eats one another to survive, whether it be a vegan eating plants or a carnivore eating meat, any organism that can develop a buffering illusion to survive such a horror show has an evolutionary advantage over others that cannot. This came into sharper relief for me this past week as I was watching the British-made television miniseries War of the Worlds, where in one particularly poignant scene, a mother who has just witnessed the death of her children at the hands of an alien species realizes that there is no point in continuing to live in such a horrific environment. She opts to shoot herself, and the viewer, instead of being shocked, perfectly sympathizes with her decision. Nature is a madhouse if looked at objectively, and therefore it is not surprising that we have evolved all sorts of mental defense systems in order to live long enough on terra firma to pass on our genetic heritage. Since we are the survivors in this boiling cauldron of eat or be eaten, we have inherited a variety of tools to ward off the true existential dread that can overcome any being that becomes too keenly aware of how this DNA game plays out. I mention all this as a necessary preface, since no matter how well-versed we may become in science, and trained to become good doubters, in the positive sense of that term, we still retain at the core of our beings a deeply emotional component that defies a purely rational or logical way of being. We may act like scientists from time to time, but we are not scientists in the long term. We are vulnerable creatures, and our myths and our fairy tales will persist even if we opt for agnosticism or atheism, though they may take on a different color and hue and justifications. Thus, this book provides us with but a small glimpse of how to think more rationally and critically, despite the sobering realization that we cannot be great skeptics all the time. Philip J. Klass by Hee Jun Park. Philip Julian Klass was a prominent American UFO skeptic and an aerospace journalist who has written 7 books on UFOs and has appeared on television. He was a top editor for the Aviation Week and Space magazine for many years before he rose to fame as a leading critic of Americans who believed in aliens and UFOs. In his lifetime, Klass has made a name for himself as a skeptic and was ranked number 5 on the top skeptics list of the 20th century by the Skeptic Inquirer. Class was famous for several reasons, such as coining the term avionics and writing several books debunking UFOs. Class has also gotten hate mail from people that believed in aliens and was called a disinformer, who was sent by the government to keep the truth on extraterrestrial life away from civilians. However, according to a longtime ufologist James Moseley, although he disagreed with Class's aggressive style of attacking other ufologists such as James E. MacDonald, he noted that Class's candid works truly did benefit the field. He also stated that most prominent ufologists in the world even pleasantly tolerated Class. Philip Julian Class was born on November 8, 1919 in an urban city named Des Moines, which is the capital city of Iowa. Class grew up in the second biggest city in Iowa, Cedar Rapids, under his father and mother, Raymond Class and Ann Traxler. At a young age, Class showed interest in engineering, especially in vehicles when he won a ride in an autogyro in the Iowa State Fair. This may have been an influence from his father, who was a successful lawyer for automobile negligence. Class also showed interest in hands-on building, as noted by his sister Roseanne Class, who stated that he was often spending his time building crystal radios. Class's passion for engineering at an early age was a reason why it was no surprise when he went on to graduate from Iowa State College with a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering in 1941. Class was known for devoting most of his life to his works. He was a workaholic and a loner, which explains why he had married so late, at the age of 60, to Nadia Ganu, a Bulgarian refugee. Between the two, there are no children. However, Ganu had a son who escaped with her from Bulgaria. After graduating from college, Class entered the workforce amidst World War II as an engineer for General Electric, and worked on the development of electronics for aviation for 10 years. In 1952, with his acquired knowledge of electronics for aviation, Class transitioned into journalism and became the first avionics editor for Aviation Week and Space Technology. As a senior editor for Aviation Week and Space Technology, Class left a legacy that would impact the aerospace industry for years to come. Sometimes his passions were out of line. For instance, one time, Class ran into trouble with the FBI for disclosing classified information on his report in 1951. Later on, the investigation on Class was dropped after the U.S. Air Force shared their concern of exposing declassified information for the prosecution to the FBI. Class ventured into the field of avionics, and he was quite successful. Class had become one of the first persons to write about inertial navigation systems, 1956. Infrared missile guidance, and detection, 1957, and microelectronics, 1957. According to an interview with Philip J. Class himself, in the microelectronics article, Class predicted that without the benefit of psychic power, that the then embryonic technology would revolutionize electronics. Class's insights and breakthrough reports mark him as one of the pioneers of the avionics industry. One of his most recognized works within the aerospace industry is the book titled Secret Centuries in Space, 1971, which was one of the first books that covered spy satellite technology. In the book, Class discusses the history of satellites and how they work and how it impacts world politics. The book garnered much attention and was praised for the thorough summarization of the U.S. reconnaissance program. Class continued to work as a senior editor for Aviation Week and Space Technology until he retired in 1986. However, retirement could not stop Class's love for avionics, as he continued to contribute until 2002 for Aviation Week and Space Technology. Although Class left a firm legacy in the aerospace industry as a pioneer of avionics, he did not rise to fame until he became a critic of UFO believers. Class was an interesting personality as a UFO debunker. He garnered many followers, but at the same time became a target of hatred. Class's background in electrical engineering helped him assess many situations by methodical research, which helped him see objects in the sky differently from the vast majority of the UFO believers. Interestingly, when Class was asked about how he felt about the virulence of his critics, he responded, "I'm flattered. because it reveals that my efforts have struck a sensitive nerve. Class was never swayed by the emotions of the crowd, and for this reason he was able to approach the UFO sightings in a realistic and rational way. Due to his analytical nature and interest for atmospheric phenomena, Class always had a prosaic explanation for UFO sightings. Oftentimes, his logical and down-to-earth explanations frustrated many UFO enthusiasts, which led to death threats and accusations that framed Class as a disinformant sent by the government. However, Class was not afraid to be blunt and tell the world what he believed in. Class became involved in the UFO field when he first read the book Incidents at Exeter, 1966, by John G. Fuller. The book entailed a series of stories about UFO sightings in and near Exeter, New Hampshire. Upon reading the book, Class was certain that these stories about the UFOs were true, that these sightings were a mere byproduct of power lines generating a ball of lightning, also known as plasma. After reading the book, Class wrote up a review explaining the possible reasons why people might have mistaken a ball of lightning or plasma for a UFO. The review garnered much attention, and Class became an overnight celebrity in the UFO field. Class believed his plasma theory debunked virtually all reports of UFO sightings. However, it was not well received at all. One person who rejected Class's theory was a physicist named James E. McDonald. The two could not come up with an agreement and exchanged heated letters on the subject. The interaction between the two did not do a favor for Class's image, especially when he carried on an ad hominem attack on McDonald that had nothing to do with the subject in hand, UFOs. Eventually, a group of plasma experts claimed that Class's theory of plasma balls was unscientific, and as a result, Class decided to drop his plasma ball theory altogether. After Class quietly dropped his plasma ball theory, he quickly presented new ideas. Class claimed that all UFO sightings can be classified as atmospheric phenomena, such as clouds, comets, stars, or airplanes. Class also added that some may even be hoaxes. After presenting his ideas, many UFO enthusiasts were quick to criticize Class, because Class would almost always try to claim a UFO sighting as a hoax without any evidence. But Class was right. At least by his standards. Class always had a prosaic explanation for sightings. One of his early investigations of UFO sightings may have contributed to Class's mindset for claiming UFO sightings as hoaxes. In an interview, Class described his first major investigation in 1966 at Socorro, New Mexico. A policeman by the name of Lonnie Zamora apparently witnessed an egg-shaped UFO landing, 2 ETs in coveralls, and the UFO blasting off like a rocket. Class claimed that the policeman might have witnessed an atmospheric phenomenon due to high-tension power lines and thunderstorms in the surrounding area. However, Class quickly changed his mind when he was informed by an atmospheric physicist at the New Mexico Institute of Technology that city officials made up rumors to stimulate the dead economy. With further investigation, Class claimed one of his first major investigations as a hoax. Class then stated in the interview that he quickly wrote off a lot of highly suspicious cases similar to the Socorro sightings as hoaxes. Other than investigating UFO sightings, Class was involved with debunking theories of alien crashes. In 1987, Class ran into Majestic 12 documents which was discovered by a ufologist named Bill Moore. The Majestic 12 documents apparently were top-notch government papers that documented an alien crash cover-up by the government. However, Class questioned the authenticity of the documents and attempted to raise several points that cast doubt on the validity of the documents. After several months of attempting to debunk the authenticity of the documents, Class realized that he was not in the position to debunk these documents. Determined to discover the truth about the documents, Class decided to inform the FBI that Dr. Moore was leaking top-secret documents. This prompted the FBI to carry out investigations on the documents, but in the end, nothing definitive came about. After this, most people sided with class and believed that the documents were fake. Class lived a fulfilling life, garnering much attention from both supporters and critics. In his last years of debunking UFOs, Class left a curse upon UFO enthusiasts when he warned, "To ufologists who publicly criticize me, or who even think unkind thoughts about me in private, I do hereby leave and bequeath the UFO curse. No matter how long you live, you will never know any more about UFOs than you know today. You will never know any more about what UFOs really are, or where they come from. You will never know any more about what the U.S. government really knows about UFOs than you know today. As you lie on your own deathbed, you will be as mystified about UFOs as you are today. And you will remember this curse." Class passed away due to cancer in Cocoa, Florida, on August 9th, 2005. For further reading, see ETs may be out there, but he says they're not here. UFOs Explained and Bringing UFOs Down to Earth. James Randi by Veronica Ramirez. James Randi, an amazing man known in the world of magic and skeptics. The one and only Amazing Randi, a magician, escape artist, skeptic, investigator of the paranormal and pseudoscientific claims, one of the most well-known magicians of the 20th century, right next to Houdini himself. James Randi, otherwise known by his full birth name, Randall James Hamilton Zwing, was born on August 7, 1928 in Toronto, Canada. As a child, he was very well educated for his age, but due to him not attending class sessions with the exception to take exams and quizzes, he became strangely antisocial. Because of this free time, he went to a magic show called The Great Blackstone, by a magician named Harriet Blackstone. James was, in his words, mesmerized as the woman was being lifted by nothing. It was at that moment he decided that he was going to become a professional magician. In 1945, at the age of 17, Randi had dropped out of high school and left home to join a circus where he would become a magician and learn the ins and outs of the trade. In the documentary The Honest Liar, Randi begins his tale on how he first started with psychic tricks, such as mind games. However, before every performance Randi did, he would always disclose a disclaimer so his audience would know his intentions. He would start by saying, "Good evening. I am the great Randi, and I am a cheat, a liar, and a charlatan. I will blatantly lie to you, but only for entertainment." He viewed magic as entertainment that people know is not real, yet is fascinating to watch. Randi did many stunts such as escaping from straitjackets, handcuffs, chests, rope, similar to those Houdini once did. However, Randi wanted to one-up him. He wanted to be the best of the best, and he did this by learning from Houdini's trial and error. Another magician by the name of Uri Geller was rising to stardom, but for the more cunning reasons. He claimed he was psychic and managed to fool the world of science. It was Geller's tricks that made Randi think, how can people believe such foolishness? How can this man turn science and scientists into fools? This led Randi to become a skeptic, and later on in his career, he created a $1 million challenge for people to prove their psychic abilities, with the caveat that they must do so in an honest and transparent way. There have been several attempts, though no one has succeeded thus far. So, in 1979, he set out to do an experiment on the public, which he called Project Alpha. When starting this project, he enlisted two males by the names of Steve Shaw and Mike Edwards, who would make the public think they were psychics. Randi was working in the background, so he made a scientist the lead person in conducting the experiments that were given to Steve and Mike. The two had passed every condition that Randi had placed before them. It was later, in 1983, that Randi finally told the public that these two males, Mike and Steve, were not psychics, but had developed simple conjuring methods to dupe their audiences. This naturally generated much controversy and much criticism, primarily among those who were highly educated, since they didn't like feeling they were just pawns and getting duped. It was during the 1980s that Randi became a well-known magician to a larger audience due to exposing or bringing light fake magicians who use their talent to trick people into believing that their psychic powers are real. In his book, The Truth About Uri Geller, published on September 1, 1982, he builds a solid case around why Uri Geller is using sleight-of-hand tricks. For example, Randi exposes how Uri is not using his mind to bend or snap the head of the spoon off, but rather how the spoon is already bent before the show, and all he does is rub it at its weakest spot. While continually showing in various arenas, usually on late-night television shows, that Uri Geller was a fake, he would also continue to do his tricks and fascinate people while Geller was doing the same. In 1987, Randi attempted to do one of the most well-known escape tricks known as the milk carton. The milk carton escape trick is where one locks himself in a metal container filled with liquid and attempts to escape. Yet as Randi attempted to perform the feat, he failed and almost died. He obtained a deep fracture or depression within his vertebrae. Turning his attention to religious fraud, Randi wrote a book called The Faith Healers. He goes into detail on how people bring magic tricks into the world of religion, and thereby dupe unsuspecting believers by a series of rudimentary parlor manipulations. In 1996, Randi co-founded an organization that is named after himself. The company is known as James Randi Educational Foundation, which he created to investigate supernatural claims. Throughout Randi's lifetime, he was awarded many awards that recognized his investigations of paranormal and pseudoscientific claims, and protecting science's name and creditability. One of the many awards he was given was the Joseph A. Burton Award in 1989, which recognized his commitment to genuine science against claims of the paranormal and pseudoscience. For further reading, see The Honest Liar, The Truth About Uri Geller, and Faith Healers. Brian Cox by Tyler Cardena-Wagers. Brian Cox is a world-famous physicist, author, and television personality. He is a prominent contemporary skeptic, often using his many public outlets to candidly address questions about science, God, and climate change in the hopes of encouraging people to think for themselves. Brian Edward Cox was born March 3, 1968 in Oldham, Greater Manchester, England, to banker parents. As a child, he participated in dance and gymnastics and attended the Hume Grammar School in Oldham. When he was 12, he read the book Cosmos by Carl Sagan, who he now calls a great hero of his. In his teens, Cox taught himself the piano with the intention of becoming a pop star. He recalls in an interview with ABC, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, "I'd always wanted to be a scientist, particularly an astronomer. As far back as I can remember, so all the way through school, I just knew I was going to be a physicist. Then, around the age of 15 or 16, I decided I wanted to be a pop star. It wasn't as if I was a musician, so I taught myself to play really in order to be a pop star. It's the dream that you have when you're 16. Then, accidentally, it happened for a while. So I had a brief break. Then I went back to university when I was 23. He was successful, playing keyboards for the English rock band Dare and Northern Irish pop band Dareem, with the latter landing several hits on the UK charts. Cox's return to education was studying physics at the University of Manchester, completing his BS and MPhil in physics, and his PhD in high-energy particle physics. Cox married American-British television presenter and writer Gia Malinovich in Duluth, Minnesota in 2003. In 2009, she gave birth to Cox's first son. Cox has conducted research at both the Hera and LHC particle accelerators and authored hundreds of scientific publications. He has also co-written several books with physicists Jeff Forshaw and Andrew Cohen, notably Why Does E Equals MC Square and The Quantum Universe. He's now a professor of particle physics in the School of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Manchester and appears on several television programs, many on the BBC, about science and cosmology. He has also been a guest speaker at several TED conferences and toured globally giving talks to live audiences about physics and cosmology. He's widely recognized for his ability to make complicated science accessible for the layperson. In 2010, Cox was honored with the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, OBE, Chivalry Award, and in 2016, he was granted the Fellowship of the Royal Society of London Award, recognizing him for making a substantial contribution to the improvement of natural knowledge. Cox's consistent appearances on television, radio podcasts, and at conferences have granted him science celebrity status, the likes of which Stephen Hawking, Carl Sagan, Richard Feynman, and Neil deGrasse Tyson have experienced. Cox is a prominent cosmologist, the scientific study of the origin, evolution, and eventual fate of the universe, and regularly uses his publicity to advocate for learning about our place in the universe, to better answer fundamental questions like why are we here? He is outspoken about his stances on several controversial topics, several of which are cited below. God and religion. Cox has stated that he does not believe in God. Although he has rejected the title atheist, he steps carefully around the topics of God, religion, and spirituality, admitting in an interview with Joe Rogan, "I'm always careful. Science can sometimes sound arrogant. It can sound like the discipline of telling people, you're not right. And it's not that. It's the discipline of saying, this is what we found out. If you want to philosophize or do theology, you have to operate within that framework, because it's just an observational framework. It's important to be humble when you're talking about science. It's not able to answer ultimate questions at the moment. Religion is a natural thing. You see it across the world in all different cultures. But I think that in the 21st century, religion needs to operate within that framework if it's going to operate. I don't think the problem comes when your theology or your philosophy forces you to deny some facts, some measurements. These things are measurements. It's not my opinion that the universe is 13.8 billion years old. We measured it. People say the Earth's flat or whatever. It isn't. We've measured it, so just stop it. But that doesn't mean you can't be spiritual and you can't be religious. I would say it doesn't mean you can't believe in God or gods. That's not ruled out. In another interview with ABC, he comments on the supposed incompatibility of science and religion, emphasizing that, I don't believe in a God. However, I don't like the antagonism that occurs or is produced by this question. What you can say if you're a cosmologist, what you should say is, we know that the universe was very hot and dense 13.8 billion years ago. We don't know how it got hot and dense. We don't even know actually if the universe had a beginning in time. We don't know. Science starts for me with I don't know. I don't believe there's any evidence for a creator. However, there certainly isn't no evidence. We're stepping into an area where we scientists don't need to be. The last thing we should do is close off that possibility of someone being a scientist because someone has faith. Paranormal ideas. Cox explains the paranormal as a combination of apophenia, our tendency to connect unrelated phenomena, and our inability to deal with unexplainable perceptions, stating in an interview with British talk show host Lorraine, "We're bad, as human beings, at understanding coincidences. So when something happens to me, and there's a full moon up there, for example, we tend to attach more to that than there is. It's interesting. It's about our perception. We're making so many measurements of the world and seeing and processing different things in our remarkable brains, and sometimes something doesn't quite go according to plan. Something strange happens, and we attach a great deal of weight to those things. So I think as far as we can tell, and as far as we understand the science, and we understand science very well, no, ghosts aren't real." Climate change. In response to the question, "What does science have to do to win over non-believers?" by the South China Morning Post, Cox replies, "The great challenges that we face as a civilization have, if not scientific answers, then require a scientific framework to answer. Climate change is arguably the number one challenge that we will face in the decades to come, and the answers are political. What do you do about it? There are many choices that we can make, from investing in different energy sources to quite radically cutting down on aviation. These are extremely difficult choices that we'll have to make, so science isn't going to answer that. But what it does is provide the framework within which we have to think. If we continue to put this number of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere for this long, then what do we think will happen? The challenge is getting people to understand the difference between the framework, which is the science, our best understanding of nature, and the political response, which is the province of people and governments." He adds in an interview with The Guardian, "Don't undermine the science just because you don't like the economics. That's a dangerous slope, because the problem, of course, is you're not undermining just that. You're undermining the basis of rational decision-making in society." Vaccines. Cox believes the anti-vax movement, as it has been called, is not only very dangerous, but undermines one of the greatest human achievements, and could unnecessarily reintroduce previously eradicated disease, articulating in conversation with Tristram Clayton of the New Zealand Herald. "The anti-vax movement is extremely dangerous, baffling to me. One of the great human achievements was the eradication of smallpox through a worldwide coordinated vaccination program. I suppose the argument is some kind of freedom-to-choose argument, and it's true. The psychology is relatively easy to understand, because I am a parent. And the idea that you will actively do something to your child which is slightly unpleasant to them, take them to the doctor and have them vaccinated, I could see how you might say, I'd rather not do that. But the point is, it's clear that these childhood diseases that we've largely eradicated are going to rise back again if, as a society, we don't properly vaccinate our children." Cox consistently echoes one sentiment in every statement he makes, the same sentiment which has defined his work and mission: the need for us as a society to respect science. Not to accept science as absolute truth, but to acknowledge that it's the most reliable source of information we have. This would require all of humanity to begin to think critically, not to abandon its beliefs, but realize that those beliefs must synergize with what we have observed objectively. Science provides us the framework with which to begin answering difficult questions. Parallel to this sentiment is what Cox believes is the biggest threat to civilization, which he outlined in the same New Zealand Herald interview. "I think the biggest threat to our civilization at the moment is the disconnect in democratic societies between fact or data, our attempt to predict what will happen in the future, and the understanding of our electorates." Carl Sagan, a great hero of mine who saw this, wrote a great book called The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. And in it he said he could imagine a time in his worst nightmares, in his grandchildren's generation, where in our societies that are entirely based on science and engineering, there's a disconnect between the majority of voters and their understanding of that society and the way society actually works. If you take one of the great issues of the day, climate change, what you see there is a mistrust of modeling. What troubles me is that there's a reaction about this way of thinking, modeling, which is the best we can do. And if you get a reaction against that, it becomes very difficult for sensible policy to be made. His solution is an easy answer to give, but difficult to implement. Education. We need to equip citizens in our societies to be able to differentiate between false propaganda and facts. Fact is a difficult thing for scientists because there are no absolute truths in science. The valuable currency in today's societies is trust. Who do you trust? Which voices do you trust? For further reading, see Why Does E Equal MC Square? The Quantum Universe, and Wonders of Life. Sam Harris, by Hannah Escada. Our minds are all we have. They are all we have ever had, and they are all we can offer to others. Sam Harris. Sam Harris is an established American neuroscientist, philosopher, author, public speaker, podcaster, and is the chief executive and co-founder of Project Reason, a popular non-profit group that promotes science and secularism. He has written numerous articles contributing to rational skepticism and the so-called New Atheism. His work goes into a wide range of topics encompassing ethics, religion, free will, politics, rationality, neuroscience, meditation, philosophy of mind, terrorism, and artificial intelligence. Harris became famous for his critique of religion, Islam in particular, and is portrayed as one of the four horsemen of atheism, along with Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, and the late Christopher Hitchens. He was born Samuel Benjamin Harris in Los Angeles, California on April 9, 1967, to parents Susan Spivak and Berkeley Harris. Susan Spivak, his mother, was a television producer who worked behind the scenes to create a plethora of shows, including a few that became iconic, such as The Golden Girls. Berkeley Harris, his father, was a television and film actor whose most acclaimed film was Shenandoah, the 1965 Civil War drama. After 4 years of marriage, the Harrises divorced. At the time, Sam was only 2 years of age and spent childhood from that point on with his mother. Harris had, as he would describe, a secular upbringing. His father, Berkeley, had a Quaker background, and his mother, Susan, was Jewish but never practiced. He lived in a humanist environment in his home where the issue of religion was not wholly welcome. Nevertheless, Harris cultivated an enthusiastic interest in the subject as he matured. He vigorously studied martial arts in his youth. Sam was valedictorian of his high school, but due to fear of public speaking, declined the formal valedictorian graduation speech. Sam told the principal he thought the official address should be given by a student who had attended the school for a longer length of time. Following his high school graduation, he attended Stanford University as an English major. During his English studies at Stanford, Harris experimented with MDMA and various other types of drugs. MDMA is the psychedelic drug most commonly known as ecstasy. Those drug-induced experiences had a profound effect on young Sam Harris and led him to begin questioning experiences and beliefs in his life, specifically those encompassing religion and philosophy. He equated the drug-induced experiences to spiritual ones and began to ponder whether those kinds of experiences were possible sober. To discover the answer to this puzzle, he left his studies at Stanford between his sophomore and junior year to study meditation under some of the preeminent Hindu and Buddhist teachers in Asia, primarily in India. Upon returning to the United States, he focused on the philosophy of mind. At 30 years of age in 1997, he returned to Stanford, only this time as a philosophy major. After completing his degree in philosophy, with an emphasis on Eastern religions at Stanford in the year 2000, he was admitted into the PhD program at UCLA to study neuroscience. Later, Harris received a Doctor of Philosophy degree in cognitive neuroscience from the University of California. During his studies at UCLA, the tragedy now known as 9/11 struck the nation. This ordeal profoundly inspired his first 2 books. Post-9/11 attack, he started working on his debut book, The End of Faith, Religion, Terror, and the Future of Reason, which was published in 2004, where he argues against the supernatural claims made by major Western religions. Belief systems, Harris asserts, inform actions. One could view the social, class, cultural, and ethnic backgrounds of people who, in his example, commit suicide bombings, and no unifying pattern will appear except the very revealing fact that they have adopted a fundamentalist belief system. Nearly 24 publishers dismissed this first book, but it ultimately found a home with the publisher W. W. Norton and Company. Instantly, it became a bestseller. The book was awarded the prestigious PEN Award for nonfiction and remained on the New York Times bestseller list for 33 weeks. These achievements catapulted Harris's career into the mainstream. While touring for The End of Faith, another aspect of his career blossomed since Harris became recognized as a talented speaker. His career speaking engagements coincided with the emergence of YouTube, making many of his speeches free and easily accessible, which contributed to an increase in Harris's popularity in the public sphere. Regardless of his growing reputation as an atheist, it was rumored Harris was reluctant to use the name to characterize his position. He argues the label does not accurately describe his stance and poses a threat. During the year 2006, he published his reaction to the adverse feedback he obtained for his first book. The small text was formatted as an open missive entitled Letter to a Christian Nation. Harris readily admits that his writing aims to eradicate any moral or intellectual pretensions presented by Christianity. A bold argument of his centers around the theory of human evolution and our gullibility in believing in supernatural beings, such as a monotheistic God. He postulates that there would have been no natural disasters if there was a higher power at work who actually cared about the well-being of humans and other animals, thus critiquing the notion of a loving God as postulated by those championing intelligent design. Following the original Four Horsemen of New Atheism conference in September 2007, Harris went on to obtain a PhD in cognitive neuroscience. Since then, Harris has written and podcasted extensively about consciousness from a materialist scientific perspective. He is adamant that free will is an illusion. Regardless of Harris's reputation as an atheist, he has also analyzed consciousness and free will from a spiritual outlook and first-person perspective. One of Harris's more intriguing ideas focuses on free will or lack thereof. Harris lays out the argument that the concept of free will is incoherent, and so those who believe they act freely and are responsible for those actions are ultimately duped by their environment and biology. Our choices are composed of thoughts and thoughts that appear in our minds, seemingly without a source. Their existence is the product of a complex nexus of environment and biology, both of which the person has no control over. If the situation is composed of these conditions, then we cannot accurately claim that such a person has freedom or is responsible for the decisions they make. No clear answer can be given to this conundrum of free will. Therefore, the concept must be a false idea. Harris has many critics, including libertarian philosophers, who believe some human actions are genuinely free. These thinkers contend that this mysterious appearance of the thought to select one thing over another, and this sentiment that we do conduct free acts, is the nature of freedom. Thoughts are mysterious only if one infers that there must be a known continuum that involves other factors like brain events and environmental influences, and the impression that we are in control is the explanation for believing that it is us that provokes the thought into existence. Since his first few books, Harris has written several articles for major news outlets, including the Huffington Post, the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, and Newsweek. In addition to being a best-selling author, he delivers lectures at various well-known universities in America and England. Harris has also been featured in the media on numerous talk shows and even in documentaries, including God Who Wasn't There, 2005, and The Unbelievers, 2013. The Webby Awards featured Sam Harris as a 2017 winner in the General Podcast Science and Education category. For further reading, see The Moral Landscape, Lying, Free Will, and Waking Up. Eugenie Scott by Jenny Wang. Eugenie Carol Scott was born on October 24, 1945. She is an American physical anthropologist, a former university professor, and an educator who has been a critic of Earth creationism and intelligent design. Since 1986, Scott served as the executive director of the National Center for Science Education, ECSE, for 28 years, a non-profit science education organization supporting teaching of evolutionary science. Since 2013, Scott has been listed on their advisory council. Scott earned her Ph.D. in biological anthropology at the University of Missouri. Most of her research has been in human medical anthropology and skeletal biology. Scott has devoted herself to science for nearly her whole life. Scott not only is a member of the Board of Advisors for the publication Scientific American, but also a Fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, CSI, and GWUP, Gesellschaft zur wissenschaftlichen Untersuchung von Parawissenschaften, English translation, Society for the Scientific Investigation of Parasciences, a non-profit organization that upholds scientific skepticism. Moreover, she serves on the board of trustees of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, a non-profit organization that advocates for the separation of church and state, and which holds as its motto, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Scott was born and raised in Wisconsin. Her interest in anthropology was initiated after reading her sister's anthropology textbook. Scott received both bachelor and master's degrees from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Then she pursued her Ph.D. from the University of Missouri. Later on, in 1974, she joined the University of Kentucky as a professor of physical anthropology. That's when her journey to the front lines of the evolution wars began. When her mentor, James Gavin, a physical anthropologist at the University of Missouri, accepted an invitation to debate Duane Gish, a biochemist and a leader in the creationist movement, her passion for the creation-evolution controversy was sparked. At the time, Scott was a newly minted professor of physical anthropology at the University of Kentucky. In the debate, Scott expressed her opinion. The scientist talked science, and the creationist connected to the audience and told good jokes and was really personable, and presented a lot of really bad science. She then concluded that creationism is a movement that could have really serious consequences for science and science education. Aside from being a professor in the University of Kentucky, she also taught at the University of Colorado and California State University, Hayward. In 1980, Scott worked to thwart creationism from being taught in the public schools of Lexington, Kentucky. She objected to the idea of allowing creationism in education, the idea that the universe was designed as it is by a supernatural power, or its ideological cousin, intelligent design. She mobilized scientists, educators, lay people, religious groups, skeptics, agnostics, believers, scholars, and ordinary citizens to advance the cause of science. Soon after, Scott was nominated as the executive director of the National Center for Science Education in 1987, the same year in which the teaching of creation science in American public schools was deemed illegal and no longer a requirement by the Supreme Court in Edwards v. Aguillard. Scott was brought up with Christian beliefs by her mother and grandmother, and later she started attending a congregational church under the influence of her sister. She described her background as liberal Protestant. Now, Scott is a secular humanist and describes herself as a non-theist. In 2003, the San Francisco Chronicle reported that Scott describes herself as atheist but does not discount the importance of spirituality. In 2003, she was one of the signatories to the Third Humanist Manifesto, Humanism and Its Aspirations. Dr. Scott's first well-known book was called Evolution versus Creationism, An Introduction, and was published by Greenwood Press in 2004 and then in paperback by the University of California Press in 2005. She co-edited with Glenn Branch of the 2006 anthology Not in Our Classrooms, Why Intelligent Design is Wrong for Our Schools. In 2006, Dr. Scott, John D. Miller, and Shinji Okamoto had a brief article published in Science entitled Public Acceptance of Evolution, an analysis on surveys on the acceptance of evolution from the last 20 years in the United States, in comparison with other countries. The result displayed Turkey had the lowest acceptance of evolution, and the United States came in as the second lowest. Even though the result was slightly disappointing, the author saw a positive sign in that a high percentage of Americans are unsure about evolution. Therefore, there is still a level of improvement on reaching those on the fence concerning the theory of evolution. In conclusion, Dr. Eugenie C. Scott is a major spokesperson against the teaching of creationism as a science and for promoting the evidential basis for the theory of evolution. She has been described as someone who is often sent out to defend Darwin and refers to herself as Darwin's golden retriever. Scott has been profiled in several newspapers and magazines: The New York Times, Scientific American, The Scientist, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Stanford Medical Magazine. She has won several awards, such as the Stephen J. Gold Prize awarded by the Society for the Study of Evolution, and the Fellows Medal, the highest honor awarded by the California Academy of Sciences, both in 2009. In 2010, the Public Welfare Medal by the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. In 2012, the Richard Dawkins Award presented by the Atheist Alliance of America, to individuals it judges to have raised the public consciousness of atheism. In 2018, the Pogetta Award, the Exceptional Professional Individual from the Paleontological Society. In 2019, Dr. Scott was invited as an honorable fellow for the German skeptic group Gesellschaft zur wissenschaftlichen Untersuchung von Pseudowissenschaften, GWUP. For further reading, see Evolution versus Creationism, An Introduction. Not in Our Classrooms, Why Intelligent Design is Wrong for Our Schools. And Berkeley Talks Transcript, Anthropologist Eugenie Scott on Evolution and Creationism as Science and Myth. Christopher Hitchens, by Justin Yuan-Chun Su. At this moment, the World Health Organization has declared COVID-19 a pandemic. By April 8, 2020, over 1 million people on the Earth have been confirmed positive for COVID-19, with over 87,000 deaths. Unquestionably, this pandemic has greatly disrupted our society and economy. Many people are in a panic because we are afraid of death. This causes many theists to believe that this coronavirus is the punishment of Almighty God. In fact, Christopher Hitchens, a great skeptic, reminds us that humanity is so good at pattern-seeking and seeing meaning in things that are merely random, that we remain dutifully unaware of how probability is at the heart of many natural disasters. Throughout his life, Hitchens believed organized religions were harmful. He clearly shows that we are free to believe in anything we wish, but religions become dangerous when by their dogmas they try limiting the development of science, technology, and medicine. Christopher Hitchens was born on April 13th of 1949 and died on December 15th of 2011. As one of the four horsemen of atheism, he argued that all religions are false, harmful, and authoritarian. He asserted that atheism was a more honest view of life. Hitchens' parents had him attend two private Christian schools, Mount House School and Leys School, for the purpose of a safe environment and building a strong moral background. Then, in 1967, he was admitted to Balliol College, Oxford, where he studied philosophy, politics, and economics. And within 3 years, Hitchens had graduated with a bachelor's degree and worked for the political left weekly New Statesman. While he was working there, he met two great English authors, Ian McEwan and Martin Amis. Unfortunately, around this time, Hitchens' mother, Yvonne John Hitchens, committed suicide in 1973. Because of this heartbreaking experience, he wrote what would become his first lead article for New Statesman. When he was 28 years old, he left New Statesman to work at Daily Express, but soon Hitchens returned to New Statesman as a foreign editor in the next 2 years. In 1981, Hitchens married Eleni Meliagro and moved to New York City while he was writing several new books. Hitchens explained that he and his wife had a lot in common and had a very good marriage with 2 children. However, their marriage ended in divorce in 1989, which he announced in the Cypriot Terrorist. "We had a good marriage, and that is why we had a good divorce." A couple of years later, he married Carol Blue and remained together until he died of cancer in 2011. Throughout his early life, Christopher never got along with his brother Peter Hitchens, a Christian and an English conservative journalist. They both were raised in the same environment and attended the same private schools, but the main difference between them was the belief in the existence of God. While studying in private schools, Christopher often challenged teachers. Later, in his speech, he explained, "Why don't they call for prayer in the trains or prayer in the stock exchange? They want it in schools. Why do you think they want it in the schools? Because they want a captive audience. They want an audience that can mold and conform. Well, they're not going to be allowed to have it." Some interesting facts about these two brothers were that Christopher and Peter publicly debated each other regarding the Iraq War and religion. Moreover, in Peter's review on one of Christopher's great works, God is Not Great, Peter claimed, "My brother's book made a number of incorrect assertions." Later in life, Christopher discovered his mother was Jewish. Then he had identified himself as a secular Jew. Overall, Christopher Hitchens did not deprecate the power of faith. However, he was against all religions because religions had created a godlike figure by manipulating humans' primitive fears, death. After publishing God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, many theists were ruffled and offended by the title of the book. Some theists pointed out their particular traditions were really genuine and spiritual, unlike some of the unethical religions. Therefore, the title of the book is disrespectful and not true. In fact, Christopher Hitchens believed all religions were wrong in the same way, but not all equally bad all the time. For instance, as Hitchens mentioned in his debate, the Roman Catholic Church was the most dangerous religion in the world in the 1930s because it was leaning towards extremes of fascism. Similarly, both fascism and Catholicism had a lot in common. They were both rigidly undemocratic. In fascism, the leader had absolute power over everyone. For Catholicism, devotees pay allegiance to the Pope. And Hitchens often referred to this relationship as slavery, because that did not give us free will, and we could not choose. During the Sharpton debate, one audience member asked, If religion had meaning and purpose to 95% of people, why would you take it away and replace it with atheism, which only gave meaning to the rest of 5%? Moreover, some audience members questioned, why don't you just stay home if you don't believe in God? Hitchens defended his argument with a really amazing and humorous analogy. First, he analogized religions as people's favorite toy, and it would remain so as long as we are afraid of death. Then we would be perfectly happy for people to keep their favorite toys and play at home. Moreover, people could do any crazy things with these toys, such as hugging them or kissing them. Also, they could share the toys with people who wanted to play. However, as Hitchens stated, they could not play toys at my home, and they could not definitely force my children to play the toys with them. If and only if people would keep their favorites at their home, then having these toys were absolutely fine. This comparison highlighted the problem of religious bullying and intimidation, which could infect us in daily life, because these religions would interrupt and restrict humans from the development of science, economy, and medicine. In short, atheists talked about God not because God existed, but theists existed and would try to convince everyone about the existence of God. Furthermore, while Hitchens was debating with William Lane Craig about the existence of God, Hitchens claimed, "I appear as a skeptic, who believes that doubt is the great engine, the great fuel of all inquiry, all discovery, and all innovation." Due to this reason, he started to challenge conservative theists, and this quote became one of his most famous quotes. Also, since the odds of the Big Bang Theory in cosmology is so extremely rare, many theists assumed that the universe was designed by a supreme being. But that still did not prove the existence of a loving God, because that did not prove this creator cared about humans and answered prayers. As Hitchens stated in this speech, you cannot get from deism to theism. Most importantly, simply saying, God knew it already to all remarkable discoveries about the universe was not a strong argument at all. For example, in the early 19th century, Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace first published a new evolutionary theory on the transmutation of species, and this was for many unacceptable because it goes against Christianity's Genesis creation narrative, which was about Adam and Eve. Therefore, some established Christian churches dismissed the ideas and attacked the theory. Not until evolution was widely accepted and became a fact, more than just an opinion, did theists begin to interpret natural selection illuminating God's design. Furthermore, Hitchens pointed out that as pattern-seeking creatures, we had gone too far because, if we couldn't get a real theory, we would go with a conspiracy theory. Although pattern-seeking was first used to create hypotheses at the beginning of many fields, those hypotheses were falsifiable, and the existence of God, though, was unfalsifiable. Christopher Hitchens is one of the great skeptics in history, and is a hero to scientists. As the evolutionary biologist Jerry Coyne wrote in his blog, "There was no other humanist or atheist who so excelled in all the skills of oratory, writing, and thinking, and the man was ferociously eloquent and literate. There's nothing else to say except I wish he were here." For further reading, see Mortality. God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Hitch 22, and Does God Exist? William Lane Craig and Christopher Hitchens at Biola University on April 4, 2009. Paul Krugman by Cesar Hernandez. Paul Krugman is an American economist who is recognized for his research in international trade. Krugman was born on February 28, 1953 in Albany, New York. His parents had immigrated from Poland. He graduated from Yale summa cum laude with a degree in economics, then received his Ph.D. in economics from MIT, where he also worked after graduation before serving in the Reagan administration as a staff member on the Council of Economic Advisors. He has taught at Princeton, Stanford, Yale, New York University, and the London School of Economics. His work in international trade led him to develop the New Trade Theory, which was awarded a Nobel Prize in economics. He has also been able to balance journalism with his economic achievements. He has been an editor for the New York Times since 1999. Washington Post Monthly said he was the most influential political columnist in America. Krugman labels himself a liberal economist, and in his articles he is not shy to express his viewpoints as a liberal. Krugman was highly influenced by the book The Foundation Trilogy by Isaac Asimov. The book was centered around a futuristic group who used mathematical social sciences to analyze their society. He was 16 when he read the book and decided he wanted to study mathematical social science. Since mathematical social science was not a recognized major, he decided economics was the subject most parallel to the concept and has studied in that field ever since. Krugman is an award-winning writer and has published 27 books. In 2020, he released Arguing with Zombies. The word zombies in this context is used to represent theories or ideas, not individual people. A zombie idea is one that has been proven wrong, but individuals and groups will not accept the truth, such as believing that global warming is not real or that tax benefits will trickle down. Working under the Reagan administration, he saw firsthand how tax cuts did not trickle down. Krugman has also expressed his concern of the growing inequality in America and believes redistribution of wealth would be better than tax cuts. He would rather have cities and states help underdeveloped schools and public services. This is investing in youth, which will in effect grow the United States economy as those young men and women get older and participate in the economy. The income inequality stems from your family wealth. If a family has been wealthy for generations prior, they will have a significantly higher chance of being wealthy in their life. This can lead to wealth within a family growing exponentially, while the middle class and lower class are not keeping up with the exponential growth. Krugman is a believer in government intervention. He is part of the Keynesian economic viewpoint who believe that markets do not just work out themselves, and often government intervention needs to take place. In his work, he has cited healthcare as being one of the major systems of the United States that could use government intervention. Like Keynes before him, he has seen the economic machine fail, but he has also seen it fail with government influence too. In the year 2008, he had won the Nobel Prize. In that same year, the world had started one of the worst economic downturns in history. After the crisis, he has been filmed saying that we should not have let the banks just fail, as he believed that it could have caused a snowball effect that could be catastrophic. He cited the 1931 bank failures and how they had a domino effect that was extremely damaging to the U.S. When you let many banks fail, they will often sell off commodities. The selling of these commodities drives down the price of the commodities, which would lead to more selling. More selling would further drive the price down, which would lead to another cycle of selling. This is why Krugman is for government intervention, as it can be the emergency brake when the brakes give out. Krugman realizes it is easy to look back on the crash and say that, but during the time it was a sensitive period for intervention, and the consequences of intervention are unknown until they occur. He still stands on his belief that government intervention is better than inaction. In the 1970s, Krugman had started to look at international trade. He had been accustomed to the trade theory that was taught to him in college. To describe the theory in simple terms, if one country is better than the other at producing a good, they would make the good. The process for finding who was better at making a certain product was found using comparative advantage. Comparative advantage uses a formula to calculate the opportunity cost of production, and whichever country has the lower opportunity cost for a given good will produce that good. countries would trade with other countries that were different from them regarding the opportunity costs of production. Krugman was starting to realize that in the real world, countries did not always follow this theory. Multiple countries produced the same products. Countries often do not just make one product because they have the comparative advantage. High-income countries had been producing the same products and had been trading them. He noticed a massive shift in the 1960s. The Grubel-Lloyd Index measures intra-industry trade. Intra-industry trade refers to the trade of similar goods. He noticed that his index had risen in the 1960s, which he believed was caused by the creation of the common market, which helped take down barriers in the European trade market, but many other factors influenced the growth of the index. With globalization moving forward, he saw that trade was changing. You could trade with distant countries faster than ever, but also closer markets for trade had opened up. Krugman believed he had to shift his attitude. He felt he should listen to outsiders and not just economists. Krugman dropped the paradigm of trying to find out why every single production happened, such as why a cherry chocolate bar is made in Italy. Instead, he asked the question, why is chocolate made in Italy? Like much of the old economic models, the old trade theory had many assumptions, such as perfect competition and that certain items from different countries have the same utility. A car from Germany does not have the same utility as a car from Japan, and wine from California is different from wine from Italy. Countries still use comparative advantage because they are well versed at producing a certain product, but they will also import that same product from another country. The new trade theory says that countries will use comparative advantage, but also will produce other goods. This may be caused by the human desire to create. There are many countries who make cars. There is not just one car company that makes all the cars. The industry has gotten more divided, where countries may specialize in making windows, but another country specializes in making the doors. Within the countries, there will also be a division of production. Certain locations may specialize in the candy bar wrapping, and another state in growing sugar for candy. The influences for this type of production stems from many things, such as wages and taxes. The idea of trade led Krugman to research geography and production. When he was working on his new trade theory, he had thought about where production takes place. He thought of the obvious: where? Businesses put the production near larger populations. Large markets attract production. This can go back to the same theme as income inequality. Where there is already a number of people, more people will go, which in turn will attract production, providing jobs, creating megacities. Economics worked better at higher population levels. Adam Smith thought that the more people you have working, doing specialized tasks, the more efficient production will be. In the U.S., you see enormous amounts of people live in a certain location. With regard to population, Krugman believed where you start has a major influence. Silicon Valley is an example of production growth that started and has stayed there. He recognized the growth of the manufacturing belt in the U.S. This production belt has stayed the same from the 1860s to the 1960s, which he believes can be attributed to the starting point of these companies. When you combine the quick access to travel that had been implemented by the train, you get stagnant production location. The Industrial Revolution occurred during the same era as the growth of railroads, which cemented these areas as the location for production. Today, Krugman is still writing for the New York Times, and on April 6, 2020, he published an article entitled, "Will We Flunk Pandemic Economics?" Krugman explores the effects of the coronavirus shutdowns in the United States. He believes the government should supply help to the people most affected by the coronavirus. The government has passed a $2 trillion bill that will help those who need it, and Krugman acknowledges that. It is not enough, however. since he says the flaws in that bill are still too prevalent. The state governments are the ones who need to help since they do their budgets yearly and they have been losing massive revenue amid the crisis. Unemployment has surged, and the state unemployment offices have already been underfunded before the crisis arose. Krugman suggests effort should be directed towards the states to help reduce the economic damage by the coronavirus. Paul Krugman has been a major influence on the way people study trade. Krugman is a brilliant thinker, although he has too often let politics bleed into his analysis, which can on occasion skew his perceptions. Nevertheless, Krugman is a valuable thinker, and he provides a necessary ballast to those positing more conservative economic theories. For further reading, see Arguing with Zombies, Will We Flunk Pandemic Economics? And The Return of Depression Economics and the Crisis of 2008. Joe Nickell by Giselle Ramirez. Born on December 1, 1944, Joe Nickell is an American paranormal investigator, author, and skeptic. Known as the world's only full-time paranormal investigator, Joe Nickell has devoted his life to searching for the truth. Nickell is a senior research fellow for the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, CSI, the Associate Dean of the Center for Inquiry Institute, and author and editor of over 30 books. Joe Nickell was born in 1944 to J. Wendell Nickell and Ella Nickell, maiden name Turner, and grew up in Kentucky. Nickell completed his bachelor's degree in 1967, master's degree in 1982, and doctorate degree in 1987, all completed at the University of Kentucky. For his graduate studies, Nickell decided to focus on folklore. Joe Nickell is currently married to Diana G. Harris, and they wed on April 1, 2006. According to Joe Nickell's website, Joe and Diana were college sweethearts, but in 1966, Diana left him to return to her previous boyfriend. Reconnecting in the fall of 2003, Nickell learned that he had a daughter, Cherit, and 2 grandsons, Tyner and Chase, with his college sweetheart Diana. Nickell describes in a Skeptical Inquirer article titled Intuition, the Case of the Unknown Daughter, that Cherit had had a feeling of doubt that the father she had known as her father, Harris's first husband, was actually her father, because there was little physical resemblance with her father's side of the family. Nickell states in the article that, "I must admit to a new appreciation of intuition, without which I would not have known of my wonderful daughter and 2 grandsons. It's enough to warm an old skeptic's heart." With DNA testing, it was proven to be that Cherit was indeed his daughter that he had never known about. Elated to learn of a family that he never knew about, Nickell and Harris were reconnected and later married. From late 1968 until 1977, Joe Nickell was wanted by the FBI for fleeing the country and avoiding the draft during the Vietnam War. Many young men during this time fled to neighboring countries to avoid the draft for military service and jail, either for their own anti-war beliefs or out of fear. Nickell helped to contribute his side of the story in a book called The New Refugees, American Voices in Canada, edited by Jim Christie and published in 1972. The book itself is a collection of 18 essays, all written by American draft dodgers, deserters, and war protesters that have fled to Canada for either permanent or temporary residence. While living in Toronto, Nickell followed his childhood interest of magic and became the resident magician at the Houdini Hall of Fame in Ontario, Canada, in the summertime. He performed his last shows as a full-time professional stage magician in 1973, and after that began working as a private investigator. Gathering information from Nickell's website, he worked as a private investigator from 1973 to 1975, and never officially disclosed which detective agency it was, though he did heavily hint that it was the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. Nickell hinted at this by saying that the agency he worked at started with a P and they pursued the Jesse James gang. which the Pinkerton Detective Agency famously did. For general assignments, Nickel would conduct background investigations, check surveillance, and be a bodyguard. Working mostly in undercover jobs, he had several stints as a shipper-receiver, forklift driver, mail clerk, steel worker, lens polisher, and tavern waiter in order to uncover whatever the case needed for each particular job. Nickel lived in Toronto until President Jimmy Carter pardoned many draft deserters in 1977. Later, Nickel did some work consulting Hollywood movies about investigators. The 2007 movie The Reaping was based partly on Nickel's own career, and he was asked to consult the scriptwriters and Hilary Swank herself. He even appeared briefly on the movie's DVD. When asked about this experience by writer Alastair Starshan, Nickel says that he liked the first 10 or 15 minutes, where the character seemed to be doing something similar to what I do. But then it changed into the world of the supernatural, which, for good or evil, has never happened to me. While he describes Hilary Swank as a perfectly nice person, he did have some problems with the switch to the paranormal, simply for the drama of the movie. Starshan asked if you are taking an opposite stance from believers who are immersed in the paranormal, but at the same time, you are clearly drawn to it and you spend your life thinking about these issues. What do you make of that? Nickel responded that he too felt the emotional draw of the paranormal, and then recounted a story of when he visited a family who thought their house was haunted. He talks about how the family lived in a spooky-looking old Victorian home, and felt that, if this place isn't haunted, it ought to be. He describes how the house was imposing in nature, with its grandeur and the history behind it, and that could have led the family to believing that their house was haunted by something paranormal. He feels that when thinking rationally, we have to think with the organ above the neck rather than the one below, meaning to think with your brain and logic rather than with your heart and superstitions. Nickel and others have contended that the Shroud of Turin is not the burial cloth of Jesus, but rather a painting on linen that was made in the 14th century. Many religious people believe that the man is Jesus, and the fabric is the burial shroud that Jesus was wrapped in after crucifixion. It is currently held in Rome and is sometimes allowed for public viewing. In one of Nickel's books, Inquest on the Shroud of Turin, he argues that the facial proportions would not have been used at the time, and that it is more similar to the facial proportions of the Gothic era. In an article written for Skeptical Inquirer entitled, "Fake Turin Shroud Deceives National Geographic Author," Nickel argues that the blood on the shroud that many believe to be the blood of Jesus Christ has been tested under microscopical, chemical, biological, and instrumental tests for blood, and none have tested positive for blood. He argues that the shroud does not have any proper history to its existence and seems relegated only to the 14th century. Radiocarbon dating of the shroud proves that it originates from the 14th century, when it was fraudulently claimed to be the Holy Shroud of Christ. Nickel states that he thought of himself mostly as a writer, but through the years has been able to be cataloged under 1,066 different personas, ranging from Bigfoot hunter to environmentalist to private investigator to movie critic. Joe Nickel has led a very fascinating life. Nickel is currently still writing for the Skeptical Inquirer and continues to be a senior research fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. For further reading, see Real-Life X-Files, Investigating the Paranormal. The Magic Detectives, Join them in solving strange mysteries. And Inquest on the Shroud of Turin, Latest Scientific Findings. Ray Hyman, by Alexander Mendez. If you are going to have any chance at all to solve any problem, first, make sure your facts are correct. Ray Hyman. Ray Hyman, born in Chelsea, Massachusetts, June 23, 1928, is a well-known pioneer of the modern skeptical movement, which values evidence and logic in order to prove or disprove proposed claims. As a boy, Hyman grew interested in magic. By age 7, he began working as a magician known as the Merry Mystic. Hyman immersed himself in the world of magic and mystery, learning about famous magicians such as Harry Houdini and his work with spiritualists. Hyman practiced a kind of magic called mentalism, a form of performing art where the performer displays various intuitive abilities such as mind control, hypnosis, and telepathy. Hyman focused his skill set to palmistry, the practice of predicting one's future through the interpretation of the palm. Unlike other magicians, Hyman never disclosed that his practices were merely for entertainment, so many people believed that he could perform real magic. While an undergraduate at Boston University, a friend enticed Hyman to lie to his clients about what he perceived through their palms. Hyman tried this and was surprised to discover that his clients were still amazed by his reading's supposed accuracy. Hyman wondered how this could be possible when he was giving inaccurate readings. He became obsessed with the reactions of his participants, which led him to change his major to psychology. Much of Hyman's important research was not conducted until later in his educational career, particularly during his graduate career at Johns Hopkins University. At Johns Hopkins University, Hyman helped contribute to some groundbreaking research. One of his first and most famous publications was on the Hick-Hyman Law, created in collaboration with William Edmund Hick. The law was initially named Hick's Law. However, Hyman's name was added since it was his calculations that Hick revised. In the field of psychology, this research was considered the catalyst that caused the shift from the era of behavioral psychology to the age of cognitive psychology. The work was based on a theory that analyzed the relationship between opinions and reaction time. Hick and Hyman created a formula that conveyed reaction time relative to the number of choices, in addition to factors such as context and other available information. They found that reducing the number of stimuli that a participant must analyze reduced the amount of time it took for them to make a decision. These findings have been used for a wide range of applications, especially in product design. Product makers use the acronym KISS, keep it short and simple, to create user-friendly goods. The law impacted devices such as microwaves, washing machines, and even restaurant menus. Today, it is used in website and app development. After graduating from Johns Hopkins University with his PhD in psychology, Hyman became an associate professor of psychology at Harvard University in 1953. In this same year, Hyman was chosen by the Department of Defense to investigate paranormal claims. His cases included a woman who claimed dermo-optical perception, or the ability to read blindfolded using only her fingertips, remote viewing, commonly referred to as astral projection, and the case of Uri Geller, which Hyman is best known for. His investigations into Geller began in 1972. Hyman was informed that Geller had the ability to bend metal with his mind. He was told that Geller once had taken a ring from a scientist, placed it on a table, and caused it to break and form an S shape with his mind. Hyman discovered, however, that nobody really saw this happen. He was later told that Geller had brought the ring into the bathroom alone, then later brought out the bent metal. Hyman concluded that Geller was merely a fraud and had no paranormal abilities. In 1975, Hyman appeared on a television station in Portland, Oregon, with magician Jerry Andrews. During the broadcast, they duplicated the tricks Geller had performed for Dick Klinger, the show's host, in the previous week. The replication proved that the tricks could be performed without the need of paranormal abilities. Soon after Hyman's discovery of Geller's bogus abilities, he met with other famous skeptics to form an organization called SIR, an acronym for Sanity in Research, in collaboration with Martin Gardner and James Randi. Together, in 1976, they merged with Paul Kurtz and others to form a new organization called CSI-COP, the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. later renamed to CSI, or the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. The group was established as a non-profit organization that advanced scientific skepticism. It was heavily funded by their magazine, The Skeptical Inquirer. Based in Amherst, New York, Skeptical Inquirer's mission was rooted in Hyman's and his colleagues' passion for critical analysis and pursuit of the truth. In addition to serving on the executive council for CSI, Hyman also published his own works in the magazine. His most famous work, named Guide to Cold Reading, was a 13-step instructional guide which taught readers how to practice psychic abilities without actually being psychic. The secrets, claim Hyman, lie in factors such as the practitioner's confidence, observing body language, and fishing for information. According to Jim Alcock, another member of the Executive Council, this article was the most requested in the history of the Skeptical Inquirer. During his career at Harvard, Hyman published his work Water Witching USA, 1959. The book focused on the practice of dowsing, a millennium-old technique used to locate water. Hyman provides historical background on dowsing and combats the controversial practice with surveys, experiments, and comparisons between traditional and professional techniques to find water. Hyman worked at Harvard until the year 1961. During that same year, he moved to the University of Oregon, earning another position as an associate professor. While at the University of Oregon, Hyman conducted the majority of the research and work he is best known for. In 1989, Hyman established the Skeptics Toolbox, whose mission was to train people to become skeptics. The first meeting was held in Buffalo, New York. On all occasions since then, excluding a single event in the Boulder, Colorado, the Toolbox meetings have been held at the University of Oregon. The Toolbox is set up as a 4-day conference where people come from all around to practice their skills in skepticism. The conference is very hands-on and urges participants to split into groups to deliberate on lectures amongst one another. In the year 1982, Hyman spent a sabbatical at Stanford University. While there, Hyman held the Thomas Welton Stanford Chair for Physical Research, also known as the Spook Chair. During his time in the Spook Chair, Hyman wanted to know what the best-known evidence for psi was. Psi is defined as extrasensory phenomena that cannot be explained by known biological processes. Hyman's probing led him to the Ganzfeld experiments. The Ganzfeld experiments were first conducted by German psychologist Wolfgang Metzger, meant to investigate the perception of a uniform visual field. His research was adopted by parapsychologist Charles Honorton, whom Hyman disagreed with. A Ganzfeld experiment contrasts with sensory deprivation, since sensory stimulation is provided instead of eliminated. The experiment utilizes a receiver and a sender. The receiver is made to relax with bisected ping-pong balls placed over their eyes. They listen to static noise played through headphones, while a bright red light is shined at their face. At the same time, the sender observes a target they attempt to mentally convey to the receiver. The receiver tells the sender and experimenter what they can see, and the data is recorded. In order to judge the effectiveness of psi events, the receiver is given a set of possible targets after the experiment ends. The possibility of the receiver choosing the correct target is 25%. Honorton argued that the success rate of about 35% was ample evidence to prove the existence of psi. Hyman objected, however, claiming that the results needed to be replicated further and the experiment had many flaws, particularly in its protocol, data analysis, and documentation practices. Hyman produced 2 publications on the Ganzfeld experiments. His first was in the 1985 Journal of Parapsychology, which included his extensive critiques. His second was published in collaboration with Honorton, named A Joint Communique. The publication focused on the problems the experiments had, which both Honorton and Hyman agreed with. They concurred that replications needed to occur in order to verify Honorton's claims, and that more rigorous protocols were needed to rectify the resulting data. For Hyman's extensive contribution to the areas of psychology, parapsychology, and skepticism, he's earned many awards and recognitions. Hyman has received 2 awards from CSICOP, the first being the In Praise of Reason Award, given to people recognized for their influential use of reason and logic to appraise claims of intelligence. It was presented to him by his close companion James Alcock in 2003. The second award, the Robert P. Balls Prize in Critical Thinking, was given to Hyman for his published work Testing Natasha from Skeptical Inquirer. He earned the reward for employing excellent logical analysis to a complicated problem. Hyman has also received other awards from various institutions. In 2007, Hyman received a Doctor of Science honoris causa from Simon Fraser University. The honoris causa award is given to persons who have made remarkable contributions to their fields of work and study. Hyman also received the Philip J. Klass Award by National Capital Area Skeptics, NCAS, in 2010 for his promotion of scientific inquiry and analysis. Finally, in 2011, Hyman received one of his most notable awards of all, the Houdini Hall of Honor Award. This was presented to him via the Independent Investigation Group for his commitment to educating the public in skeptical thinking through entertainment. After a long and adventurous career, Hyman decided to retire in 1998. He hasn't, however, stopped advocating for scientific inquiry and skepticism. Hyman still gives lectures on skeptical issues and methods. He is in the process of publishing 2 new books, Parapsychology's Achilles' Heel, Consistent Inconsistency, and How Smart People Go Wrong, Cognition and Human Error. Although retired, CSI has encouraged Hyman to remain as an executive council member, a position he still currently holds. Hyman will forever be remembered as a trailblazer in the fields of psychology, parapsychology, and most importantly, the skeptical movement. For further reading, see The Elusive Quarry, A Scientific Appraisal of Physical Research, The Nature of Psychological Inquiry, and Andrew's Card Control. Susan Blackmore by Kimberly Kang. Born on July 29, 1951 in London, United Kingdom, Susan Jane Blackmore, who also goes by Sue Blackmore, is a British skeptic, writer, lecturer, academic, and visiting professor at the University of Plymouth. Blackmore claims that she was an extremely curious girl during her childhood. Her education background includes a BA degree in psychology and physiology from St. Hilda's College, Oxford University, and a PhD in parapsychology from the University of Surrey. Not only is she the author of over 60 academic articles, she has also written and contributed to more than 40 published books. She is also an active contributor to The Guardian newspaper and Psychology Today. Her areas of research include paranormal experiences, memes, consciousness, and meditation. Although she received the Distinguished Skeptic Award in 1991 from the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, now known as the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, she is mostly now known for her major contributions to the study of memetics. She started her research on memetics in 1995, and 4 years later, her book, The Meme Machine, was published by Oxford University Press. The book is considered to be her masterpiece and contains a foreword from Richard Dawkins, the original coiner of the term meme, who introduced it in his 1976 bestseller titled The Selfish Gene. Memetics is founded on the principle of the evolutionary algorithm, or universal Darwinism. Blackmore defines meme as information that is imitated, copied from person to person. She argues that memes are selfish information and that they will get copied if they can. As a matter of fact, some memes are good and some are bad, and they compete to be copied without caring about the consequences, because they can't, since they are unconscious in themselves. Blackmore also claims that humans are the meme machines because memes are copied mainly through us. The importance of the theory of memetics is that it offers a new perspective on what makes humans different from any other species, and argues that cultural evolution and the origin of humans are not solely based upon the replicators called genes, because memes are also replicators. In the article Consciousness in Meme Machine, Blackmore explains, humans appear to be the only species that readily and easily imitate a wide variety of sounds and actions. This suggests that we alone are supporting this second evolutionary process, cultural or memetic evolution. If this is so, human evolution must have taken a very different course from that of other species once we became capable of imitation. I have suggested that human brains and minds were designed by the replicator power of this new process, and that this explains why humans are so different from other species. Blackmore believes that since memes must continue to evolve, they drive evolution towards bigger brains that are better at copying the memes that are doing the driving, which explains how humans have ended up with such peculiar brains compared to other species. Blackmore made an appearance at the 2008 TED conference where she introduced a new type of meme called Team, which is a meme influenced by technology. Her research and studies on the theory of memetics have converged many times with her studies of consciousness and meditation. Blackmore explains that we cannot really define consciousness, and that the closest definition of consciousness is subjectivity. She defines consciousness as what is it like to be something, or whether there is an experience to be something. If there is no experience to be something, then that something has no consciousness. According to her, consciousness is a grand illusion. The definition of illusion, however, does not necessarily mean that there was nothing there. If one were to look it up in the dictionary, illusion means something that exists but is not something that it seems to be, or something that we are intellectually deluded about its nature, which is also what Blackmore claims consciousness to be. In addition, in her 1999 book, The Meme Machine, Blackmore explains, once a child is able to talk about his or her self, then many other memes can obtain a replication advantage by tagging on to this growing memeplex. For example, saying a sentence such as, I believe X, is more likely to get X replicated than simply saying X. Memes that can become my desires, my beliefs, my preferences, my ideas, and so on are more likely to be talked about by this physical body, and therefore stand a better chance of replication. The result is the construction of an increasingly elaborate memetic self. In other words, the self is a vast memeplex, the selfplex. Blackmore believes that many people often find it hard to admit that the notion of self is illusory, and to lose our own intuitions because we want to be somebody that controls our lives, who experiences a stream of consciousness. We want to live a life, and that is why we cannot give up our illusions. However, Blackmore also shares that there are some methods that can help us let go of the hold of the self. The first one is through scientific discovery, and the second one is where the Zen meditation comes in. As someone who has been practicing Chan, which is also known as Zen, over the course of 30 years, she often expresses that the Zen meditation has helped her get rid of the memes that create the false notion of self by giving other memes a chance to rise. Blackmore identifies as an atheist. Although she practices Zen, she does not consider herself as a Buddhist because she is afraid that the memes of Buddhism can be as pernicious as those of any religion. She used to consider religion as a virus of the mind, but changed her viewpoint through her posting for The Guardian back in 2010, where she claimed that religion carries both harmful and beneficial effects on those who believe in it, and therefore it cannot be considered a virus. She also advocates for the legalization of drugs, claiming that she takes illegal drugs to get inspiration. She has consumed a variety of recreational drugs such as cannabis, LSD, psilocybin, also known as magic mushroom, ecstasy, Special K, DMT, mescaline, and cocaine. Nonetheless, her ultimate go-to ones are LSD and those that produce the mind-revealing hallucinogenic effects comparable to LSD. She asserts in one of her publications that without drugs, her scientific works and books would have never existed. Although she is aware of the negative effects of drugs on her body and health, she believes that those are the trade-offs she must make in return for the scientific inspiration, the wealth of new ideas, and the spur to inner exploration. However, it is important to note that Blackmore also sees drug addiction as a problem. She once mentioned, "The drugs can take you up in a helicopter to see what's there, but you can't stay. In the end, you have to climb the mountain yourself, the hard way." Even so, by giving you the first glimpse, the drugs may provide the inspiration to keep climbing. It seems that Blackmore advocates for legalization of drugs because she believes that there are glimpses of this world and peculiar perspectives which one can only access through the influence of drugs. To put it simply, Blackmore strongly believes that drugs create a feeling of curiosity that may provide an individual with a much higher level of understanding in solving universal mysteries. Blackmore has been serving as a consulting editor of the Skeptical Inquirer since 1998, and was a member of the editorial board for the Journal of Memetics from 1997 to 2001. Her other famous publications are Consciousness, an Introduction, 2003, Conversation on Consciousness, 2005, and Zen and the Art of Consciousness, 2011. Blackmore's first marriage was to Tom Trosianko in 1977. They have 2 kids together, a daughter and a son. They divorced in 2009, and a year later, Blackmore married Adam Hart Davis, a well-known British author, historian, and broadcaster. In 1995, Blackmore was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. For further reading, see The Selfish Gene, The Meme Machine, and Consciousness in Meme Machines. Adam Savage, by Brian Tam. Adam Savage was born in New York City. During his childhood, he was raised in Sleepy Hollow, New York. When Savage was a child, his curiosity on how things work ignited his thinking on skepticism and atheism later on. He graduated from Sleepy Hollow High School. Later, after enrolling in NYU's Tisch School of the Arts program, he dropped out 6 months later. He married Julia Savage in 2002 and is the father of 2 children. Over the past decades, Adam has mainly focused on films, television shows, animation, and design. He is mostly known for his contribution to science and skeptical thinking through his Mythbusters television show, which is an Australian-American science entertainment television program by the Discovery Channel that promotes math and science for young people and to think critically by employing the scientific method. In the podcast Point of Inquiry, host Karen Stolznow spoke with Adam Savage about how he applies skepticism and atheism to his scientific methodology in Mythbusters. When talking about how myth perpetuates, Adam Savage believes that it is a natural human inclination that guides him to know more about how our world actually works. In Mythbusters, their experiments are heavily based on logical reasoning and critical thinking. It is the core of the science, hinged on evidence and analysis by performing a scientific experiment, and to illustrate how the thing works by testing it out. In Savage's viewpoint, the scientific methodology serves as an approach to understanding the truth of the world. However, as he pointed in the podcast, he is trying to test it rather than to prove it. The difference between them is that the latter one always requires a conclusion such as true or false, and the former one does not. This method emphasizes the importance of the experiences itself. By doing more than 2,000 separate experiments in Mythbusters, from dropping a Mentos into a bottle of Diet Coke to talking or playing music to plants to see whether it will help them grow, Savage considers himself to be a budding scientist. Regardless of what the result of the experiment would be, such a grounded method demonstrates how an empirical way of thinking proceeds. During the process of building a scientific hypothesis, it requires modeling and design. When the hypothesis is employed, it will look for supporting evidence to see if it holds up to rational scrutiny and experimentation. According to Skeptic magazine, modern skepticism is embodied in the scientific method that involves gathering data to formulate and test naturalistic explanations for natural phenomena. A claim becomes factual when it is confirmed to such an extent it would be reasonable to offer temporary agreement. But all facts in science are provisional and subject to challenge, and therefore skepticism is a method leading to provisional conclusions. The scientific experiments in Mythbusters deliver outcomes that can be regarded as a provisional conclusion on how things operate. It is very significant to note that it is not a definite conclusion on such phenomena, but a temporary and tentative one. The physicist Albert Einstein said, "Science will never be a finished book. Any development over time reveals more and deeper difficulties." The methodology in science is changing continuously. Regardless of the experimental outcome, each experiment can have different results when using a different method to test. Nevertheless, this perspective is opposite to what a religion promotes, which relies more on faith than in logic and reasoning. Fundamental concerns such as morality, ethical values, and aesthetic judgments can scarcely be handled by science. It might be argued that it is out of the realm of science's province. For instance, even if computational AI is trained to overview billions of behaviors and patterns, it will still be emotionally laden humans who will be the final adjudicators on how to live a moral life, even though AI may help in our ultimate decisions. In April 2010, Savage delivered a speech to the Harvard Humanism Society about morality. "I want to start by saying that, to me, any discourse from me about how one can live a moral existence without religion or the church would sound improperly defensive. That there's an opposite to be defended is absurd, and based on a provably false premise. So let's dispense with that." He has also indicated that it is false that there exists no morality outside of religion. A man's ethical behavior should be based effectually on sympathy, education, and social ties and needs. No religious basis is necessary. Man would indeed be in a poor way if he had to be restrained by fear of punishment and hopes of reward after death, said the famous physicist Albert Einstein. What is suggested is that religion and morality are inseparable. For people who have faith in secular morality like Savage and Einstein, they believe morality is within humanity itself. I've noticed that if I'm paying attention to those around me, to myself, to my surroundings, then that is the very definition of empathy. I've noticed that when I pay attention, I'm less selfish, I'm happier, and that the inverse holds true as well, said Savage. If the morality of religion is based on faith, it is reasonable to infer that their secular morality is based on pure perception from the brain. In the podcast show Big Picture Science in mid-2016, Savage has proclaimed that he would rather say that he is a scientist or critical thinker than skeptic or atheist, as he thinks that the idea of skepticism is overly negative nowadays. However, his respect and thought for truth are still identical to what a skeptic would put forward, even though he no longer likes the label skeptic. For further reading, see How the Science Entertainment Television Show Mythbusters Teaches the Scientific Method, Big Picture Science, Skeptic Check, Busting Myths with Adam Savage, and The Skeptic Magazine. Martin Gardner by Tiffany Wang. Martin Gardner was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, on the day October 21st, 1914, and he passed away in May of 2010. Martin Gardner was most known for being a mathematician and science writer, yet he was also a major figure in the promotion of skeptical thinking and for debunking charlatans and frauds who manipulated audiences with magic and sleight of hand, claiming they had mystical powers they didn't. To most people, math is a difficult subject since it relies on logic and precision. For many, studying math was not a fun and interesting activity. However, it was a totally different situation for Martin Gardner, who found the subject endlessly fascinating. Because of this, Martin Gardner wanted to make mathematics approachable and enjoyable as games and other daily life activities. Perhaps because he was not professionally trained to be a mathematician, it helped Martin Gardner to get more ordinary people into enjoying math. His writings and works done on math are not like textbooks or reference materials, which tend to be dry and not engaging. What Martin Gardner did, instead, was to make math games which involve riddles and puzzles and labyrinths, where one finds herself on an adventure that necessitates a solution. What was even better than the mathematical games Martin Gardner did was his introduction of magic tricks, which used mathematics to better understand how they work. Many people know of Martin Gardner from his Scientific American column on recreational mathematics, which was one of the most popular parts of the magazine for 25 years. Aside from the column, Martin Gardner had also published various mathematic puzzles, some of which are still readily available online. Martin Gardner has written multiple books, short stories, and essays. His annotated version of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass are great examples of how he helped readers try to unravel various mathematical conundrums that for most readers remain buried or unresolved. By writing on subjects that are not entirely about mathematics, yet still highlighting the math portion of the subject, he showed how important understanding numbers is in all walks of life. Martin Gardner realized that people love puzzles and love adventures, and that math is a wonderful way to unravel problems that may not be resolved in any other way. He made math a tool for finding buried treasures, which in turn allowed readers to enjoy math as a tool and not some dreary and unnecessary subject in grammar and high school. Gardner was quite interested in magic, especially when it seemed to be violating the known laws of physics. He wanted to show that magic only appeared to conflate cause and effect, because humans can easily be deceived. He wanted to show precisely how such magic tricks worked, and why they were within the known laws of physics. He wrote a brilliant book on this subject, entitled Mathematics, Magic, and Mystery. The text introduced magic tricks that were performed based on understanding certain mathematical formulas. He also included those math-based magic tricks in his writing for his Scientific American column. Because of his works on magic and mathematics, the magazine Magic named Martin Gardner one of the 100 most influential magicians of the 20th century in 1999. Martin also received a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2005 from the Academy of the Magical Arts. Martin Gardner and some fellow skeptics founded the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, CSI-COP, in 1976, which is now known as the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, CSI. His contribution to the skeptical movement mainly came from his passion for science. Martin Gardner studied the claims and events that appear not to be explainable by science. In his first full-length book, Fads and Fallacies in the Name of Science, he critiqued cultic thinking and showed why pseudoscience is really anti-science. The following are a series of pregnant quotes from Martin Gardner that provide a glimpse into how he tied in math with clear and rational thinking. The annotated Alice, of course, does tie in with math, because Lewis Carroll was, as you know, a professional mathematician, so it wasn't really too far afield from recreational math. because the two books are filled with all kinds of mathematical jokes. I was lucky there in that I really didn't have anything new to say in the annotated Alice, because I just looked over the literature and pulled together everything in the form of footnotes. But it was a lucky idea, because that's been the best seller of all my books. As Bertrand Russell once wrote, 2 + 2 is 4, even in the interior of the sun. Biographical history, as taught in our public schools, is still largely a history of boneheads. Ridiculous kings and queens, paranoid political leaders, compulsive voyagers, ignorant generals, the flotsam and jetsam of historical currents. The men who radically altered history, the great creative scientists and mathematicians, are seldom mentioned if at all. Debunking bad science should be constant obligation of the science community, even if it takes time away from serious research or seems to be a losing battle. One takes comfort from the fact there is no Gresham's laws in science. In the long run, good science drives out bad. Mathematics is not only real, but it is the only reality. That is that the entire universe is made of matter, obviously, and matter is made of particles. It's made of electrons and neutrons and protons, so the entire universe is made out of particles. Now, what are the particles made out of? They're not made out of anything. The only thing you can say about the reality of an electron is to cite its mathematical properties. So there's a sense in which matter has completely dissolved, and what is left is just a mathematical structure. For further reading, see The Hermit Scientist, My Best Mathematical and Logic Puzzles, and The Night is Large. Harry Houdini by Felicia Jacobus. Do not jump to the conclusion that certain things you see are necessarily supernatural or the work of spirits just because you cannot explain them. Harry Houdini. Born on March 24, 1874, in Budapest, Hungary, Harry Houdini was one of the world's greatest illusionists and stunt performers, known for his uncanny, sensational escape acts. More than that, he is also a noted debunker of spiritualists and psychics. His original name was Eric Weiss, which he later changed to Harry, an Americanized version of his nickname, Airy, and Houdini, originating from the French magician Jean-Eugène Robert Houdini. During his early years, Houdini worked various jobs to support his family, where he attained the skill of picking locks working as a locksmith, a skill very much used later on in his career. Houdini began to pursue his career in magic and started his professional career at the age of 17, doing small magic shows and working with his brother Theo as the Houdini brothers. He then married Beatrice Ronner, who would serve as his lifelong partner and stage assistant under the name Bess Houdini. Through the years, Houdini gained attention after repeatedly escaping police handcuffs and prisons. He would offer $100 to anyone who provided handcuffs from which he could not escape, but not once did he ever have to pay. Naturally, Houdini earned the title the King of Handcuffs. After several acts and successfully making his name in the United States, he toured to Europe, where he extended his fame by escaping from straitjackets and coffins. It was said that his tricks were attained both from his strength and remarkable skill of picking locks. A common feature of his performance was being immersed into an oversized milk can filled with water and hidden behind a curtain. Houdini would usually escape in 3 minutes, but would frequently wait behind the curtains for almost half an hour, purposely to create suspense and a dramatic reappearance. One case in England, Houdini allowed the milk can to be filled with beer instead of water. Not used to the effects of alcohol, as he never had a taste of it, he had to be pulled out to safety by his stage assistants. It was one of Houdini's rare cases of failures. Although those instances happened, Houdini's act reached its peak with the Chinese water torture cell in 1912, where he was suspended by his feet and lowered upside down into a glass tank filled with water. The performance was so daring and suspenseful that it became the hallmark of his whole career. Houdini was able to successfully perform his dangerous, difficult acts as he practiced regularly and relentlessly. To further develop his capacity to hold his breath, he installed an oversized bathtub in his house to be able to practice routinely. Through extensive training, he was able to play card tricks without looking at his hands and tie and untie rope knots with his feet. As an illusionist who plays tricks and has dealt with various possibilities that bring about death, Houdini had developed an interest in the matter of afterlife, including the realm of spiritualism and the occult. This marked the beginning of Houdini's animosity towards spiritualism and mediumship. Following the death of his mother Cecilia, with whom he had been very close to, Houdini sought to find evidence of the afterlife, hoping to be able to reconnect with his mother. Houdini, along with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, a friend of his, would attend more than 100 seances, a meeting attempting to make contact and communicate with spirits in the afterlife. Doyle was known as one of the most prominent advocates of spiritualism back in the day. Later on, however, Houdini found that the mediums he met were often frauds. Being a magician with knowledge in depicting deception and illusions, Houdini had the ability to detect and recognize such trickery. It was at this time that he began his vigorous campaigns against psychic mediums. He began investigating their methods, ultimately exposing their frauds. Houdini's attempts to debunk psychics and mediums directly influence his performance on stage. Oftentimes, he would duplicate their methods and reveal the tricks and frauds of mediums as a part of his show. On top of that, he would answer questions concerning false mediums in newspapers all around the country, claiming to have exposed the lies of what he called as vultures who prey on the bereaved. There was an episode in the spring of 1922 where Houdini had decided to set up a demonstration to show Doyle that he had found a way to manifest slate writing, a common method among mediums employed for receiving messages from the dead. In actuality, Houdini was trying to prove how it was mere sleight of hand. He succeeded in pulling off his trick, leaving Doyle, who had always believed that Houdini possessed psychic powers and spiritual network, in awe. Houdini then explained such to Doyle himself. "Sir Arthur, I have devoted a lot of time and thought to this illusion. I won't tell you how it was done, but I can assure you it was pure trickery. I did it by perfectly normal means. I devised it to show you what can be done along these lines. Now I beg of you, Sir Arthur, do not jump to the conclusion that certain things you see are necessarily supernatural, or the work of spirits, just because you cannot explain them." Unfortunately, Doyle refuses to be swayed by his beliefs, continuing to believe that Houdini had psychic abilities. The following summer of 1922, Doyle's wife had given Houdini a purported message from his deceased mother, claiming to have been achieved from automatic writing initiated by a trance. However, Houdini was doubtful as the letter included several suspicious marks, such as a cross, which was odd as his mother was Jewish, and the fact that the letter was written in English, which Cecilia did not speak. Houdini knew immediately the letter was fraudulent and exposed Doyle's wife for portraying deceptive psychic abilities. In 1923, Houdini took a time off from his shows and traveled across the country to give lectures regarding false mediums and spiritualism. Later on, in the same year, he decided to join a committee formed by Scientific American magazine to offer a total of $5,000 for any mediums that could show genuine psychic abilities by passing the committee's tests. After a few months of joining the panel, Houdini had succeeded in debunking renowned medium Mina Crandon, better known as Marjorie. This act turned him against Doyle, resulting in a rift between the two because they had opposing ideologies. The friendship dissolved and eventually turned into public threats and lawsuits when Houdini unveiled the deceiving methods of one applicant of the prize whom Doyle had previously endorsed. Undaunted, Houdini continued on to expose spiritualists and false mediums until the day of his death. Interesting enough, even the seemingly ruthless debunker could not resist the temptation of doing one last spiritual experiment before his last breath. Some time before his death, Houdini had instructed Bess, his wife, to look for signs and evidence of his attempt to communicate with her in the afterlife. On October 31st, 1926, at the age of 52, Houdini died of peritonitis from a ruptured appendix in Detroit, Michigan. It was said that his affliction was caused by a punch on the stomach by a McGill University student, rupturing his appendix. Houdini refused to seek medical help and continued to travel until the day of his death. Bess continued to look for evidence of Houdini's soul, holding private seances every Halloween for more than a decade. However, before her death in 1943, Bess declared the experiment a failure. It is as if Houdini, even after his death, proved the lies and deceit of spiritualism and the supernatural. 10 years is enough to wait for any man, Bess uttered. For further reading, see The Great Harry Houdini, Magician Among the Spirits, and The Miracle Mongers, an Exposé.